Digital 410 proudly presents the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast with your hosts Don Abernathy, Jeff Copsetta, and Henry Sledge.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast, your favorite World War II podcast. And even though for some of us it feels like a Sunday, happily for everybody, it's a Monday. And we are back once again live from the Digital 410 studios. And joining us, as always, Mr. Henry Sledge, Jeff Copsetta. And we're excited for tonight's guest coming on to promote his new book, The Long March Home, author Mr. Marcus-Brotherton. Gentlemen, how's everybody doing tonight?
Doing fantastic. Glad to be here.
Yeah, this is going to be a great episode.
Now, just to give everybody a fair warning before Marcus comes on, Jeff gave us the heads up. If his audio starts to drop out or if he vanishes completely, that's because he's looking down the barrel of a hailstorm right out his window. And so we're got to deal with his Texas internet tonight. But Marcus, sir, how are you doing?
Doing well, thanks. Yeah, great to be here.
And we appreciate you taking time out of your Monday night to come on and hang out with us. We're excited to discuss your book. And we're always excited to see new content coming down the line in the World War II content realm. So if you... Actually, I was thinking maybe for the uninitiated, before we get into your book, we give a brief background on... the Battle of the Philippines and the Bataan Death March. You know, we all know that most people who aren't as up to date on World War II as we do, they all think, okay, Pearl Harbor, and Pearl Harbor was it. That's what we got us into the war as far as Japan goes. They attacked Pearl Harbor, sank some ships, and we got in a battle in the thick of things, but that wasn't exactly it, because while Pearl Harbor attack was going on, the Japanese was initiating multiple attacks on multiple fronts, and along came the Philippines. So maybe we should start off with dipping our toe a little bit into the Battle of the Philippines and the Bataan Death March, and then we'll get right into your book.
Yeah, it's really key to keep in mind. European theater gets a lot more attention, I would say, than the Pacific, and there's some reasons for that. And it's not, we're not trying to pit the two theaters against one another. I think that's key as well.
Sure.
My passion is I just want people to be aware of the Pacific and what happened over there. And you know, a lot of good people gave a whole lot of blood, sweat, and tears. So, yeah, the Philippines was an American protectorate at the time. So there were maybe 20,000 troops over there, and then they were allied with the Filipino troops. So about 10 hours after Pearl Harbor was attacked, the Philippines are attacked as well. And it's a fight. And so the troops fight back, but they are outgunned and outmanned, and most of the fleet has been destroyed at Pearl Harbor, so they can't get resupplied. They can't get reinforcements to come. So they're kind of inched back, and finally they find themselves with their backs against the sea, and there's just nowhere to go. So that's what leads to it all.
And I think one of the things you said, outgunned, is a very, very important aspect of this. People know from watching Pacific and reading the books and studying that, yes, when the Marine Corps got sent down to the Pacific, we were fighting with, a lot of World War I materials, but they did have some new equipment, whereas in the Philippines, they were, literally just forces that were kind of pre-war, especially our participation in it, with the exception of Lend-Lease. They had antiquated weapons, antiquated gear. They were just kind of down there, as you said, as a protectorate. They didn't have top-of-line, firearms, gear, plethora of ammunition. And so what they had kind of stationary was what they had when they were stuck fending themselves off for all this time.
Yeah, it was when the troops initially got over there. It was before Pearl Harbor, and I did a nonfiction book last year called Bright and Blinding Sun, and the atmosphere in the Philippines during that time was kind of a big party.
Yeah.
The war, it's not going to come to us, surely. And while we're here, we can get a cheap beer and have a good time. That was really, it was swell duty being sent to the Philippines. It was kind of like if you've been in the service for a while, they called them Asiatics.
Mm-hmm.
They were often trying to get there and enjoy a grass skirt and a drink under the sun. That was the idea. And then a lot of these guys were just brand new. The book I did last year, Bright and Blinding Sun, Joe Johnson, he was only 14 when he enlisted. He fibbed about his age and kind of snuck under the radar. So he was just as green as could be. And a lot of the troops, they were maybe 18, 19, but they none of them had seen any action, of course.
It's amazing how as time goes by, we hear more and more of these stories. As more stories come to light, more letters, paperwork get undug. We find, in case of Sidney Phillips, he was there. He turned 16 on Guadalcanal, or turned 18 on Guadalcanal, and how many young men enlisted with the help of their parents. And I often joke, back in 1942, we had 15, 16, 17-year-olds fighting to save our planet, and nowadays I can't get a 16-year-old to mow the grass without attitude. So it's just amazing how far we've come along as far as responsibility and patriotism and willing to do your part at such a young age.
Henry, how old was your dad when he was sent over there?
Marcus, he enlisted at 19. He wanted to enlist sooner, but my grandparents implored him to go to officer training. So he did the Georgia Tech officer training program, then flunked himself out. So when he actually enlisted and went in as an enlisted Marine, he was 19.
Yeah.
And then as Don said, Sid went in at 17 and turned 18 on Guadalcanal.
Yeah, I think back to what I was doing at 18 or 19, and what were you guys doing at 18 or 19?
I grew up in the 90s, and I was trained not to talk about those things on video and or recording, so I'll refrain from what I was doing when I was 18 in this aspect.
It's crazy to think that, kind of the weight of the world is on your shoulders at that age.
Right.
Absolutely. Jeff, you joined. Well, how old were you when you joined up the service?
I was 17, but I turned 18 2 weeks before basic and turned 21 in Baghdad.
And so, you could definitely speak to being that age. Here I am joking around talking about can't get 16-year-olds to mow the grass, but here you are 17 already. I'm sure you by 15, 16, you were already looking into, obviously that seed probably sprouts earlier than you just wake up one day at 17 and a half, say, got nothing to do tomorrow. I'll go join the service.
I think I knew I was going to join the service when I was about 5. But when you're young, dumb, and there's a reason we send young men to war, because men our age would say no, heck no. But it's those young men that have to become, or boys that have to become men, that really define their generation based on what they did that they probably would not do at an older age or after they had children or things like that. So I think that's always an interesting dynamic when we talk about young people at war. It's a whole different dynamic for those younger people as opposed to the 20-year veteran, sergeant majors or colonels, that they're waging war in a much different way than the guys on the front lines or in the mortar platoons.
So Jeff, you were still in high school then when you enlisted. I signed my contract right before I was a senior in high school and went over and we talk about that a lot on here. Was in basic when September 11th happened, so I have a pretty good idea of that peacetime to wartime, transition overnight. So I'm really looking forward to more of your story here because, man, just earlier today. Well, if our listeners just Google what happened on December 7th, right? It's going to be Pearl Harbor. Go to history.com, go to libraryofcongress.com. It's going to say the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. Or you might even get December 7th was also interesting because that's the date that America declared war on Austria-Hungary in 1917. But it's so much more than that, and it's so enlightening to me to know that you've put together this work for people to enjoy the rest of the story. It's just Pearl Harbor was one of those puzzle pieces that really I think people need to understand and really appreciate America's involvement and what drew us in and what really happened. It boggles my mind that the stand at Wake or female nurses in Corregidor being among the first POWs, how do those things get lost in the sauce behind the battleship Arizona? Right. And of course, not to take away from that tragedy, but
it was a series of tragedies, and you have to understand it to know the full story.
There are various theories on what was actually in the mind's eye of Imperial Japan, right? I think it's safe to say it was a coordinated attack to take all of the Pacific Rim, and they were heading for Australia. That was the big prize, and then once they had all that, nothing was going to stop them.
You know, kind of to Jeff's question, why does one aspect of the war seem to get so much light shined onto it opposed to other? And this is me just totally talking out my rear end here because it just popped in my head, with the exception of Wake Island, because they actually had a film crew there. I think a lot of that has to do with the amount of video footage that was readily available to television show producers in the 70s and 80s when they, you know, before the History Channel came out, and people who were putting together documentaries. A lot of this stuff was still, you know, classified. You couldn't just go down there and get all this military video footage. And so I think a lot of the stuff that we know nowadays, at least in pop culture, people who don't read books like we do, I mean, we can see the ones behind Jeff, but just your everyday regular Joe Schmoes in the world, I think they get most of their history from what was on TV. And what was on TV was produced based around the footage that people can acquire to put on TV. I mean, how many times have you watched a show about a particular conflict, Marine Corps, for example, or I was actually watching something getting up to speed on Bataan Death March in the Battle of the Philippines, and for a split second, I could have sworn like they cut to a clip, black and white clip of Vietnam, because it looked like the barrel was a barrel of an M16. It's like, wait a minute, that doesn't belong. So I think, and you'll see it from time to time where they're talking about Marine Corps, and all of a sudden you'll see a soldier in an army uniform walking by. It's like, oh, the guy editing the video doesn't know the difference. But I wonder if a lot of what we know, especially growing up in the 70s and 80s, is because of what was available to television production crews. It's just a hypothesis.
It's a great question, yeah. I know from having interviewed veterans in both theaters, you know, I was talking to Shifty Powers before he passed. Probably half a dozen times we got to talk before cancer got him.
I'm so jealous. I would have let him been a fly on the wall, just listen to any one of his stories.
He was amazing, and he would call me up, which was the crazy thing. Like, who am I? But he would call me up and just say, yeah, you know, I had a good day. And he just, I think he was housebound at the end, and the cancer was really getting to him, and he had time on his hands. He would listen to books on tape, and if he had a really good day, he would go on his back porch and shoot his M1 at targets he had there in his backyard, which was just amazing. But, you know, Shifty, the big thing he was known for was his empathy. And there's that classic scene in Band of Brothers where he talks about how, you know, this man, he was just doing his job. This man on the other side, this enemy. But under different circumstances, we would have been good friends. And I think a lot of the vets anyway in the European theater that I've talked to, certainly there were gritty parts of that battle, absolutely, of that war, that side of the war. But there was a sense of, okay, the war's over, and now let's just get back to our jobs and get back to our homes and start our families and buy that refrigerator and get on with life. A contrast to the veterans that I've talked to and interviewed who have fought in the Pacific, R.V. Bergen, to name a name, and he went on the record with this, just saying, man, he would never own a Japanese car. There was still a sense of, I'm not going to forgive. There was too much that went down. And I don't trust them today. I mean, that was RV's big stance, right or wrong. But it was a grittier, more difficult, more, I don't know. And I struggle with the adjectives there because, you know, what happened in Europe was horrific stuff. But the guys in the Pacific, that's my observation anyway. When they came back, I could name half a dozen guys who took that same stance as RV, that bygones weren't bygones. It was grittier, tougher stuff.
I think barbaric would be a good adjective.
Yeah.
You know, it's not funny, but it strikes a memory when you say that. I was born in 78. Karate Kid was out. You know, at the time there was a lot of, you know, Asian culture that was seeping into pop culture and all that. I remember I went to the Richwood Flea Market in Kentucky as a young kid and watching all these karate movies and all that. And I saw this really cool bandana, had a red circle on it and some scribbles on it, and I wanted it, and I bought it, and I wore it in my grandmother's house. My grandfather did grave registration in Europe, and my grandmother was upset, was a light adjective to use. She wanted that bandana nowhere in her house because she couldn't prove what was written on it because she didn't understand the language. And I didn't understand at the time why. My mom was like, hey, it's different times. Times are different. You know, it's just from the flea market. He likes it, Karate Kid, all that stuff. And, you know, all these years later, like you were just saying, you know, even though my grandfather fought in Europe, I'm sure she had family members, boys from the town who went to her school who died in the Pacific. And even in 1984, she still kind of had that same feeling of don't quite trust it. And
I definitely saw that through my dad's eyes. And you know, I remember in the 80s, because I loved Karate Kid, and that, you know, when the Hachimakis were real popular there for, you could go in any mall and see stuff like that. And, you know, my dad didn't like it. I mean, he was not shy about expressing his opinion on it.
Mm.
And I'm sure a lot had to do with the fanaticism on the, you know, the side of the Japanese soldiers and the things they saw, the mutilation of bodies and all that stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things that goes along with war. So when you were coming to research and maybe plan to roll out your latest novel, how did you settle or come to the story of the three gentlemen that you highlight in the book, The Long March Home? How did this particular project come to your light, and how did you settle on it and proceed to go down this path?
So it all started in real life with Lieutenant Buck Compton. He he started it all, which is kind of a funny story. But I did Buck's book back in, it was like 06, 07. Call of Duty was called. And Buck was, I mean, he was really my teacher, my mentor, my professor. I came in pretty dumb to the whole subject, and he gave me just a great education. And the cool thing was it continued even after his book was finished. Buck was 85 when I helped him write his memoirs, and he was still in pretty good health, still traveling all over the country to various shows, and he was still speaking. And so his daughter, Tracy Compton, who's just a great person and a great friend of mine, she called me up after his book came out and said, hey, yeah, you know, my dad could use some help navigating airports. Would you like to travel with my dad?
That's a nice assignment.
One of these questions that just comes along, you know, once in a lifetime. I'm like, absolutely. So I ended up doing 3 trips with Buck, and he had a really great memory, particularly for things that happened, you know, in the war years and surrounding that. Sometimes he couldn't remember what happened yesterday, but you know, that's me as well today. So we'd be sitting in an airport just waiting for a plane, and he would have just minuscule detail of things that he could recall from what happened in, you know, 42 and 43. So we're sitting in an airport one day, and he's talking about Bastogne, you know, and I'm just sort of all ears, and he's, you know, it's just this winter hell, and guys are, you know, no boots, and Joe Lesniewski has wrapped his feet in burlap bags, very literally, and that's how he's gone to combat. And there's not enough food, and they're eating this bean soup with maggots in it, and just, you know, tough time. Belgium's coldest winter in 30 years. So I'm just sitting there going, man, Buck, wow. This must have been so hard for you to be in Bastogne. And when I say that, Buck stops, and he kind of looks at me, and he goes, yeah, we had it rough. And then he says, but we didn't have it as rough as the guys in the Pacific. They had it really rough. So that statement stays with me for years. And I'm kind of going, what does he mean by that? And so I read Donald Knox's Death March Oral History Project when the guys are about 65, so they're really fresh there. And that was my introduction to the subject. And then Adam Makos did, and I worked on Voices of the Pacific together, where we interviewed all the guys from K-35, and that really brought me face to face with just many of these men. And but I was looking for that story surrounding the Bataan Death March. I got a chance to interview some vets who had been there, but their story just wouldn't work out for a whole book. And so I began to dream of this book where I could take readers into the heart of the action. Like, I love oral history. I've done oral history projects, but kind of the limitation of oral history is that you often get kind of the treetop view, as opposed to a really good movie or a really good narrative, nonfiction or a novel, which really just plunges you deep into the heart of the action. So that's what I really began to dream of. And I began to work on this book that eventually became Long March Home. I worked on it for 7 years. It was a back burner passion project. It was unfunded at the start, so I was just working on it in sort of pieces, little by little. Got a manuscript done. This was 5-6 years ago, and I sent it out to some early readers just to get their perspective. And the feedback that came back to me was, yeah, it was good. It was really good, but it wasn't great. Not great yet. And I wanted it to be great. I wanted it to move from that sort of that B+ level to an A+ level, because the guys are worth it, right? I wanted to shine the spotlight on what they had done, and I really wanted to elevate it. So I called my agent. We talked it through, and he's like, here's the deal. You're writing fiction in this case, based on history. More women buy fiction than men. And this book and the subject matter is so gritty. Talk to a female novelist, get her on board, get her take, and how can you make this sort of palatable for everybody? And palatable is the wrong word, but you want a story that's just blood and guts to not be blood and guts all the time.
Sure.
So I called up my friend Tosca Lee, and I had read a number of her books, and she had endorsed a book for me a number of years earlier. So we were both kind of familiar with each other's writing styles and whatnot. And I said, how'd you like to write a book with me about the Bataan Death March? And this was her statement. She goes, what? What is the Bataan Death March? And it was this started the conversation, where I explained a little bit of it to her, and then I kind of sent her some nonfiction books to read. And she was aghast. She was like, exactly what we're talking about here today. She's like, why have I never heard about this? Ever? What's the deal? Why are we not teaching this in schools? It's such a big piece of our history and a key piece of our history. And Tosca's like, and I've never heard about it. So that lit a fire underneath her to go, okay, we have to educate people about this period of history. If I don't know about it, and she was in her late 40s at the time, yes, we have to start talking about it. So she took my existing manuscript. She worked on it for a couple of years because she was in the midst of a different project at the time. She finally got it to a stage where she was happy with it, and she knew her readership would be happy with it. And then we started working on it back and forth just to get it all into one voice. And finally, this book is out there, and the reviews are coming back. We've got 3 distinct starred reviews from Publishers Weekly, Booklist, Library Journal. Extremely hard to get. We feel strongly that this book has become an A+ piece, that we are truly honoring the vets who are there, and it was our best work to get out there.
And so the book is based around 3 friends from Mobile, Alabama, and their trip of enlisting into the service and then going over to the Philippines and then surviving the death march, the ships, internment in Japan, basically the whole gambit. And like you say, you kind of, and that's kind of a hard task to ask someone who's not familiar with a particular subject. Hey, here's a subject. Maybe some of the reasons it's not covered in wide swath is because of the brutality, and it's war, but it's really truly a study on how humans treat other humans in the worst possible environment and condition of war. And how do you take such a rough, raw subject matter and make it, as you said, palatable, but not take away the severity and the importance of that brutality, because it's that brutality that makes that story so important to tell. And how do you do that in a way where you maintain its importance and the severity of it?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a question we talked about for probably a year. I mean, just trying to ask that question. And the challenge is if you just have in a story brutal, 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 then you become desensitized to it as a reader, as a viewer even. And so one of the things we did was we created a separate storyline that happens on the home front. So that's three best friends and then the girl they leave behind back home. And we weave this other story in to the Death March accounts. And so you'll read a bit about the Death March, and then you'll go back to Alabama for a while, and then go back to the Death March. And the effect it creates is like you can take it, like you can take the grit, and then you get a little respite, and then you can take some more of the grit. And we are hearing a little bit of criticism that it's still a little bit too gritty. I mean, yeah, and we tried to pare it back enough just to make it so you could get into it. So I think it works, and the real critics, the critics who do it for a living, they're saying it does work. It's some bloody stuff, absolutely.
Well, maybe there's a little bit of benefit that this book came out in a time where the number one core audience to true crime stories and true crime novels are women. And so they kind of got a little bit of a foundation of reading gritty, raw material, and so it may lend it a little bit, of ease of maintaining one's ability to make it through the harder pages to get back to the flashbacks. And that's probably kind of nice too, is it's almost, as you're saying, you read through the gritty stuff and then here, okay, we're going to take 2 chapters to go back and kind of fresh your palate a little bit, and then, let your heart rate lower down and kind of get to know these guys on a personal level. And that probably building that personality and the character development and that personal level makes it even harder to imagine these people going through such horrible events to them, opposed to just 3 random people that here's 3 names that we really don't know thrown in a situation. But when you build that character behind it, and then they can imagine those people going through that, it's got to make it that much more relatable and heartfelt.
Yeah, that's a great point right there. In my original manuscript, I started the book on the march itself. And then Tosca came along and said exactly what you said. It's like, now we got to get to know these guys a little bit better. And so, I'm thinking campaign. I'm thinking, let's dive into the action. And she's like, no, it'll be actually more powerful if we know who these guys are. And even the Bataan Death March, I mean, just to understand what that was all about. So April 1942, the Allied troops surrender on the Philippines. Now they keep fighting for another month on Corregidor, right? The island that's right off the coast there. But for the troops who are on the Bataan Peninsula in the Philippines, their combat days, so to speak, are over. They are ordered to lay down their weapons and surrender. And there's some good reasons for it. I mean, it was hopefully to prevent more bloodshed. And that's probably another whole discussion right there. But anyway, so the troops are rounded up on the peninsula because they're not all fighting together. They're kind of fighting in sort of spread out pockets. And so Imperial Japan, they round up the Allied troops, and then they begin to march them up the peninsula to these POW camps. For the guys on the bottom of the peninsula, it's about 66 miles, and it takes almost a week. If you're farther north, you're not marching as far, but you're still marching, 3, 4, 5 days. But the brutality on the march itself is that, and even to put yourself in the eyes of the enemy, they're going, holy cow, this huge army has just surrendered, because there's another probably 60,000 Filipino troops. They're surrendering as well. And suddenly we've got to deal with them. And our superiors are telling us, show no mercy, and don't share your food. And in that mindset, if you surrendered, you were considered a coward, and there was no respect for troops who surrendered.
That's what I want to put that's what I want to put a fine point on for our audience who aren't familiar with the mindset of Imperial Japan. You know, being asked to put down your weapons, you think, okay, cool, they're happy, we're no longer. No, you're a coward, and now we got to deal with you. And to surrender to a military that frowns upon surrendering because you're a coward and dishonor your people, they're not going to treat you nicely because, okay, you're no longer shooting us. Now you're dealing with somebody who has a complete lack of respect for you.
It's a perfect storm. It's the worst of the worst. And so these Allied troops, as they're being marched up to these POW camps, there are indiscriminate beheadings, beatings. If a man falls out of line, he's stabbed with the end of his bayonet. There are convoys of Imperial Japanese soldiers who are driving up next to these marching soldiers, and they would stick a rifle butt out of the end of the truck and just sort of take a whack at a soldier's head as he's walking. It's like playing baseball with mailboxes. Just horrific stuff. Some men were mowed down by rifle fire. Some men were mowed down by tanks. As they went alongside of the troops. If you stop to, and the men, they're emaciated, and many of them are sick. If you got out of line to take a crap by the side of the road, you were shot. I mean, this is tough stuff. And person after person is falling and dying, and it's just a horrible time for sure.
And oh, by the way, they're not marching 100 kilometers in a nice pair of Brooks or New Balance shoes. They cut on, old ragged boondockers with socks that are all, blisters on their feet and dry conditions. And just, if you did come across water and you quote unquote smuggled it, you can easily be beheaded for it. I mean, so even if you're trying to do your best to maintain your health so you can do what you're being asked to do, then you're punished for that too. And so it's truly a no-win situation for these guys.
The rules were changing. The rules were being made up on the spot. Even if you're trying to sort of keep the rules that your new captors were giving you, those rules were hard to figure out. And there's a language issue. There's a language barrier. You name it. It is tough stuff.
And even though the history and the category is titled the Bataan Death March, the march in and of itself is just the beginning of the nightmare. Once they got to the camp, which was an old army base, the living conditions there were horrible.
Yeah. There's any number of camps, but one of the main ones is Camp O'Donnell, which is you do hear about Camp O'Donnell every once in a while, and conditions there are pretty lousy. A couple thousand guys are being crammed into this facility, and the prisoners are given various work details by their captors. And sometimes the men are outside gathering firewood. Sometimes they're growing crops, although most of the food is being given to Imperial Japan and not the prisoners themselves. Some of the guys are put on burial detail because the deaths in the camp are just growing so much. And so they are carting dead bodies outside of the camp every day and burying them just by the hundreds. Just some crazy stuff that's happening in the camps.
How many, you just alluded to the fact, Marcus, that there Camp O'Donnell was not the only camp. Do you know how many there were?
I forget the exact count. Yeah. And that's a good point, Henry, because some camps, and so I say this carefully, some camps were better than others. Now They're all bad. I think we have to get that. But yeah, some camps, like Bilibid Prison was actually one of the better places in the heart of the city there. And Bilibid was considered better because they had some better medical facilities there.
Mm-hmm.
There were some American doctors and medics that were still allowed to practice. And they didn't have very much supplies, but they were still sort of given, like if a man was sick at Bilibid, he might get better.
Mm-hmm.
One of the fields was boy, and the name is just escaping me. It's where the international airport sits today. The name's going to come to me at like 3 a.m. It'll be like, why didn't I say Nichols Field? Okay, so Nichols Field was probably a step beyond Camp O'Donnell in terms of bad situations.
Mm-hmm.
So at Nichols, they were tasked with constructing an airstrip, and they were constructing this airstrip by hand. So it's this big hill of dirt and rocks and gravel, and the prisoners are they're given shovels. I mean, this is not backhoe stuff. They're given, railway cars and picks and shovels and told to move this hill by hand.
Yeah.
So this is kind of dawn to dusk, back-breaking work. And the Japanese want to construct this airstrip sort of as quickly as possible so they can, land bigger planes and whatnot. And so the supervisors, they're getting a lot of pressure from their supervisors to hurry things up. And if a man was working at Nichols Field, he didn't last very long. So there were some better camps than others, although they're all bad.
Well, I think when it comes down to the level of better versus bad, probably had a lot to do with the amount of people crammed into it. I know the prison you spoke of earlier, one of the bigger problems they had was lack of latrine facilities. And the video I was watching earlier talking about they had so many people in there, some of them were forced to live right by the trenches that they used for latrines, and the waste was so bad that flies just engulfed the entire camp. And so if you're one of these guys who are stuck sleeping near the quote-unquote latrine, you're just covered in flies as well because of the amount of infestation just from not having a simple way to dispose of human waste. And so the quote-unquote less bad of your camp may just depend on, hey, we got 1,000 less guys here to deal with that sort of thing. So, and then if you survive that, then you got put on a ship and sent to Japan. And so it's like one after the other. It's like, okay, I survived this horror. Maybe things are going to get better. No, it's going to continue to get worse for you. And so they had these transport ships that were basically turned into troop carriers out of old cargo ships, and they were just crammed in there. And you had to hope you didn't get sunk by Allied submarines and survive the horrible situations on those ships.
Yeah, sometimes when people hear this story, they will stop at this place and become really skeptical, and they'll say there's no way that all this stuff happened to the same people. No way. But they forget that actually it happened over years. And yes, things went from bad to worse to horrible to whatever happens after horrible. It was just crazy the amount of atrocities that were sort of heaped on the same amount of people. So you've been working as a POW a number of years. You're sick, you're starved, and now you get put on the ship and sent to the mainland of Japan, where you got to go work in a mine or a factory for Imperial Japan. Now, this is toward the end of the war, but the guys don't know it yet, right? Nobody knows it yet, but particularly the guys on the ground, because they don't get any news, and so they're put on these ships and they're crammed in these ships, and many of these ships have just been used to transport horses and cattle and whatnot, and now they're being used to transport men. So there's still manure in the bottom of these things, and there's no ventilation, and there's maybe a bucket of water that's lowered down, twice a day, and maybe a bucket of rice. We're talking for like 2,000 guys.
2,000 guys with compromised immune systems who are already, it's one
and
thing.
dysentery.
It's one thing to take a healthy person right off the battlefield and put them in that situation, but as you stated before, guys who've already experienced these horrible things and who've already probably lost 30, 40 pounds, they have compromised immune systems, they're already starving, they're already dehydrated, and then to be put in those situations, it's just every one of them.
Every day they would pass bodies up out of the hole just to get these corpses out of their living conditions, and they're crammed in so tightly that they can't even sit on the floor. They're sort of belly to back, and just such hard places. And then the tragedy of this is that if you're transporting prisoners and you're abiding by the Geneva Convention, you have to announce to the enemy that you're transporting prisoners. Mm-hmm. But of course, Japan doesn't abide by that. Right. And so here come these American planes, and they spot Japanese ships, and they're bombing the Japanese ships, and it's friendly fire, not knowing that there are Allied troops deep in the hulls of these ships.
Yeah, because they don't even so much as put a red cross on them, let alone a POW symbol or anything of that nature.
Yeah.
And
is it known how many of those ships were sunk?
Yeah, I couldn't tell you offhand, but it's
more than one.
It was a lot. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the living conditions on those ships were so bad that pretty much history as a whole refers to them as hell ships, because that's what they were,
ships.
Living hell. And so if anyone listening is wanting to do some research on some of the questions we've asked, or, haven't heard of these particular atrocities, just Google hell ships of World War II, and you'll find a lot of content on the horrors that went on these boats. And so when it came to researching, and because obviously, as you stated before, you got fictional characters in a historical environment. When it comes to researching something like the Bataan Death March, what were some of the key places and key source materials you used to make sure that the historical aspects of this story were historically correct?
Yeah. I'm going to turn my camera just slightly so you can see. I mean, just even on the top of my bookshelf there, that's two stacks of 3 rows deep. That's my Pacific collection at the moment.
Nice.
So you want to read as much as you can, and then talk to anybody. In the last 3 months, I've talked to 2 veterans, and they were 101 and 103. So there is this imperative that while we still have this generation with us, I want to talk to as many as I can.
Mm-hmm.
So it's whatever you can read on the subject, and whatever you can and whoever you can talk to.
And that's another thing. When we think of survivors of war, whether it's Vietnam, World War II, modern day wars, we often think of the men who suffer physical wounds and obviously emotional wounds as well. But perfect example, the men who survived this triathlon of horrors, the physical ailments that they had to live with the rest of their lives that weren't visual. It's not, oh, he has a missing leg, missing arm. It's the diseases or illnesses that came later in life due to their compromised immune systems that they had for all those years, and things that have come to them, passing away at an early age because of, their body trying to survive all those years after the war, what they had to experience. I'm sure so many of them probably passed away at a quote-unquote earlier age because of the hardship that their body went through to keep them alive, and their willpower that they had to stay alive through all of that.
Yeah, so Joe Johnson, the vet who I mentioned earlier, when he came back from the Philippines, I have some pictures of him right when he got back to the States. Now, he came back in pretty rough shape. He had a leg wound that was needing a lot of attention. He was in the hospitals for about a year after he came home. But what's I don't know, sort of darkly telling are the pictures of him when he first comes back, because he's been after being released, he's been eating sort of as much as he can every day. and in these pictures he's swollen up, and he looks like he's probably like he's 20 years older than he truly is, because his body just can't handle this sort of massive influx of calories. And eventually he does sort of even out. But that first year back out of captivity is just so rough on his system. He was 6'4", and he had gone down to 110, 109 pounds, I think was his lowest. So, yeah.
That like strikes home for me because I'm 6'5", and my walking around weight is about 227. So to think of being in the hundreds, I can only imagine. That is tremendously skinny.
Yeah.
It's absurdly skinny.
And Marcus, I'm curious. I think we've pounded the brutality of the subject to a pretty good level here. I'm just curious, without giving too much away, because of course we want everybody to read your book, The Long March Home. But did you find in your research, was there ever this little twinkle of empathy found somewhere in some possibility with the Japanese? Was there ever any kind of a human element that you came across that this we know that this is brutal. We even a novice historian it may have just heard of the Bataan Death March, thinks, oh, it's a bunch of guys that suffered. We don't even have to go into a very deep level, I think, to get an understanding of how terrible this is. But was there ever this surprise factor in your research, like, wow, this is even more surprising than how brutal it was? Did you ever come across anything like that?
Yeah, that's great, Jeff, and thanks for bringing us back there. Certainly in The Long March Home, we write a lot about the friendship between the three guys and what went on between them. And just, yeah, there's some funny moments, and sometimes just laughter brings you out. When I was when I was researching Joe Johnson as well, and his sense of humor buoyed him along so many places. And there were the occasional compassionate Japanese guard. Like we can't sort of paint every individual within this system as all bad, because they weren't. There were compassionate guards, and there were guards who like to walk along whistling "My Blue Heaven," because that's a detail that was true to life. And in Joe Johnson's case, he was beaten once and just about dead. And this guard came to him and said, look, I've got a boy at home. I've got a son at home who's just about your age. And I know how much I want to get home so I can see him. So imagine your parents now, because they want you to get home so they can see you again. And this Japanese guard really encourages Joe along and just says, get up. If you show your captors, me included, that you're strong and you can survive this beating, everybody's going to respect you more, and it's actually going to go better for you. And this kind of the strange compassion of the guard gets Joe up and keeps him going.
That's outstanding. Yeah, I was thinking too, and this may be a subject for a whole other episode, but in talking with the veterans that you have and the research you've done, has the topic ever come up about the lack of Japanese that were charged with any kind of war crime? When we think about, of course, with the Germans and the atrocities in Europe, has that ever been kind of one of those sore subjects with the guys that did survive this, to get that final retribution, to see these guys kind of really pay? Has that ever come up in any of your findings as well?
Yeah, it's controversial for sure. I mean, because some of the guys, some of the Japanese soldiers were put through the war crimes trials. Exactly what Japan admits to these days is also controversial. And we've got that an author's note in the end of The Long March Home that talks about how there have been some apologies and there have been some retractions, and yeah, it's tough to say what sticks for sure.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah, it's a
I
little.
was going to ask that too, on that same note of the acknowledgement on the part of the Japanese. If there's been much on that. But sorry, Don, didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's a good point. I was going to go a little off subject, but kind of subject with the things that Japan may rightfully so want to not acknowledge versus the stuff that they just want to ignore. And I think it's probably 10 years ago now. I think somewhere in California, someone put together don't know if monument's the proper word, but it was a statue to make people aware of, quote unquote, the capture and use of comfort women by the Japanese. And when that monument was put out, Japan was really up in arms about, hey, this isn't something we're proud about, but, this organization in California, because of the amount of, Japanese immigrants who lived in California at the time, they wanted this known that, the Chinese population in California, they wanted it known what was done with their women during the war. And that's just another one of those things that Japan doesn't really want to come clean about. And so they were really up in arms about this monument, this thing that came out about the comfort women that were enslaved into the sex trade.
Yeah, I remember that when it came out. And comfort women, it is a subject that it needs to be talked about. It's difficult as well, because there are any number of other countries who were, when they were imprisoned, groups of their women were put into this program, for want of a better word, and Chinese and Vietnamese and Thailand and you name it. And the comfort women, it was servitude, a sex slave, mostly for the Japanese soldiers, a bit for their civilian population as well, and horrific stuff. No age requirements. I mean, we're talking kids as young as 12, maybe younger. Who quite knows? And sometimes it wasn't necessarily even prostitution, although that was part of it. It was like they would sort of crazy stories, like they would put a naked comfort woman at the head of a column of soldiers. If that column was really tired, if they've been marching for days on end, we're talking imperial Japanese soldiers, and they would think that, okay, if a naked woman is ahead of them, then these guys are going to march a little bit stronger. They're going to keep going. Crazy stuff like that, and it would often be through the territory of a captured country. So we go capture Thailand. We're going to take a woman from Thailand and sort of put her at the head of this group of soldiers, and it's her countrymen who are seeing her. So you go, wow, the incredible embarrassment, shame for this poor woman. And it's certainly not her fault. She didn't choose this. But this was the type of degradation that was happening, and on a level that was just widespread.
Which may very well go back to the aforementioned feeling that veterans and people of that generation had of maybe not wanting to turn the other cheek as we did with the Germans. And one of the things I wanted to point out when you talked about the Shifty Powers quote, I think out of all the pre-episode interview quotes on Band of Brothers, with the exception of I wasn't a hero, I served with heroes, I think that Shifty Powers, if me and this fellow were somewhere else at a different time, we very well could have been friends. It's probably one of the most powerful quotes to come out of that series on Band of Brothers. Like I said, second only to that, I wasn't a hero, but I served with a company of them. And, that quote has always stuck out to, I think, anybody who's seen that series. And
it raises a fascinating question, like how can benevolent people be turned into people who commit these atrocities? I think Germany has definitely struggled with that, and the Holocaust. Mm-hmm. I mean, here are people who have this Judeo-Christian background, and yet really difficult things are happening. We all have Japanese friends today, Japan is a country just like us. These are people just like us. And yet, what is it within this worldview that kind of shapes these soldiers that they are following orders, and yet they follow those orders, and then they go 3 steps farther. When you study the rape of Nanking, and here's a whole city where swaths of people are being butchered, and women are being raped, and it's just let's wipe out this city. And it's kind of this frenzy that happens. The fall of Manila and the capture of Manila as the Allied troops are coming in 1945, and the Japanese soldiers are leaving. They're not leaving quietly. They are leaving, slaughtering and raping people in their way. It's just horrific times. And so it raises the question, absolutely, what's going on with these people? What is happening that people can fall into that state of frenzy and perpetuate such horrors? I'm not sure there's a great answer to that.
No, and it's amazing what 90 years can change. We look back in history, say, well, that was 90 years ago. That was the indoctrination or the belief system of a people of a time. And as I often say, the older I get, the younger old gets. And 90 years ago wasn't a hell of a long time, and it's amazing how much things have changed. It's also not in the mentality state, but when you look at the state of the war and allies versus the Axis, and who was teaming up with who and who had a more shared belief system, it's really not the same. But it's an interesting look on how things have changed. You go back and talk to one of these vets who fought in Japan, in the Pacific against Japan, and particularly Henry's father, who after the battle went to China to help, police things up and try to, make sure things got turned back to relative normal. How that table has flipped, how we, our allies with China and Japan being our enemy, to nowadays we're more bedfellows with Japan, and now we're looking at China like, what's going on over there? It's like how quickly that changed in 90 years. And so it's just weird how things just change with so little time.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, prime example, Don, what kind of vehicle do you drive?
Hey, to the victors go to the spoils. I have a German Volkswagen and I got a Toyota. So,
can I go ahead? Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say I've got 4 Dodges, a Ford, and a GMC. All-American.
I've been prepared for that. Someone to point that out, but yes, to the victor goes the spoils. I grew up as a Kentucky boy and Ohio guy. My family had nothing but Chevys until about 2004, when every Chevy we bought fell through the floor. And like literally, Carrie went to Volkswagen. I went to Tacoma. My dad, after years, he had a F-350. He had Chevys, and he has a Tacoma. My brother has Tacomas. It's like, we're not picking sides. We just want a vehicle that lasts and runs when we turn the ignition.
When it came to cars, we talk about what Bergen said about not having a Japanese car. My father had very strong feelings about the Japanese post-World War II, and yet he also looked at things very pragmatically and said it's a consumer item, and they build a better vehicle than we do. And we had Japanese cars. We had some American ones too that didn't do too well, but we did both sides.
Driving a Toyota.
Huh?
There was Eugene Sledge driving a Toyota.
It was a Nissan, actually.
As long as it wasn't was it Mitsubishi who made the engines for the Zeros?
Well, yeah, they built the Zero.
Yeah, long as it wasn't Mitsubishi.
It's the same motor in this global climate. What exactly is a Japanese car? What is exactly an American car? Toyota is made in Atlanta, I think, these days.
And Volkswagens in Tennessee. And that's a very good point. Go back to the early 2000s. I acquired the 1996 Pontiac Firebird that my parents bought when I was in high school. And the air conditioning unit went out. So I took it down to place, bought all AC Delco, AC components, dropped a ton of money, drove 3 miles. It blew up. Took it back. Guy pulled the box out of the trash can, said AC Delco, made in Malaysia as part of the GM global unit, and he actually had to go out of his way to find a third-party company that actually made that same condenser in the United States. And so I tell people, yeah, American cars are assembled in America, but they're manufactured overseas, just like all the rest of them, because we don't make things here anymore. I had a thought earlier, Marcus, when you're talking about Shifty Power calling you and your conversation with Buck Compton and Berge. Has it occurred to you you're kind of like the equivalent of a sports reporter of the golden age of baseball? At least to guys like me and Jeff and Henry, you're rolling off all these names that we would be envious just to talk to any one of them. And you're like, yeah, Shifty Power's calling me. Oh, I was talking to Buck Compton. I was talking to Berge. It's like, you're like a guy who, ran the sports page during Babe Ruth's time and rolling off all these names. Just has that even occurred to you? How lucky's not luck, it's hard work, but how beneficial, or I don't know the adjective I'm looking for, but just to have the ability to say you've talked to all these people and had friendships with them, that's got to be so. I don't know. It's got to kind of be like the feather in your cap of your career, really, especially as a historian.
I don't take it lightly. That's for sure. It's and Buck Compton started it all for me. After I did Buck's book, there were a number of Buck's friends who wanted to write their memoirs from Easy Company, and I talked to my agent, and he was like, "Yeah, the industry is not going to support a book from each man in the company." So I called up Herb Sewerth, who at the time he was the president of the Easy Company Association, Men of Easy Company Association, and together Herb and I were like, "Why don't we just do this compilation memoir, and we get any of the guys who are still around to give their stories." And so that led to the book called We Who Are Alive and Remain: Untold Stories from the Band of Brothers, 20 of the still living men from Easy Company. And talking with those men, it was Buck who vouched for me, because they didn't come in just kind of going, "We're going to hand you our stories." Now I cut them in for a piece of the book, and I want readers to know that as well. The money didn't flow to me solely at all. I mean, it went to them and their families. But they often came in skeptical. I think by that point they had been a lot, kind of the celebrity limelight had been on them, rightly so. And but they were going, okay, this guy's going to do a book about us, and why and what. And so, a number of them called up Buck and said, "Who is this kid?" And Buck's, "All right, he did my book and he'll do you well." And it was Buck's key that unlocked the door. And then once I'd done that book, and I'd been to a number of the reunions by then, I was meeting all of the adult age children of Easy Company, and I did the book We Were A Company of Heroes, and that was just, there were so many great stories that weren't getting told from the deceased men, but the stories had been passed down, and these adult age children were going, yeah man, but my dad had this great story. And so we wrote a book about them, and that led to Shifty's War, and I had met Adam Makos along the way. And he had worked for about 2 years to win the trust of the vets who had fought in the Pacific for the miniseries, and that led to Voices of the Pacific. And then once my name was out there, the ball kind of got rolling, and a lot of veterans. I don't take this lightly, and I guess I'm trying to point out. Like I'm 54 now, and I think sometimes it'll be even 20 years from now, it'll kind of be like, I don't know, okay, you knew the guys who fought in the Civil War, kind of that thing. It's like I'm a living link, like Henry, you're a living link to the guys who were there, and the older that we get, that generation is going to be pretty much all gone, and then we're going to be the link. And so that's a responsibility I don't take lightly.
And it's also a very important role to play in society, because as long as somebody is around who had verbal communication and a relationship with these guys, it makes younger kids realize, oh, that wasn't that long ago. As long as, there's someone who say, yeah, Shifty Powers used to call me on the phone all the time. I mean, so it wasn't, because I think that's one of the biggest problems with history. Until you get to our age, when you're in your, obviously a kid, teenager, even your 20s, maybe early 30s, you don't realize how small of a timeline it truly is. It's like my grandmother lived to be, in her late 80s. 80 years ago wasn't that long ago. Well, either was the 80 years before that. Either was, Carrie and I, we recently unplugged from the cable and we got, we're streaming like everybody else, and we started watching the Yellowstone precursor, 1883. And there's scenes of Civil War, and it's like that. And we're trying to do the timeline to, okay, where's that particular person to Kevin Costner's character in the modern day? It's like, well, that's 1883. We know they have the series 1923, which is World War I. Kevin Costner is my parents' age, a little bit older. My mom's dad fought in Civil War. And so you go through the time like, so it would have been his great-great-grandfather, which wasn't that long ago. And when you start looking at it through the realms and the age of your family members, you realize how young our country is and how not long ago this stuff truly was.
That's well put. That was what I was trying to explain. It's important. Several of the vets I've talked to, they were eyewitnesses to the Holocaust. Like they were concentration camp liberators, and they were there, opening the gates, letting the guys out, and they were telling me what they saw and smelled and felt, and they were there. And we get these Holocaust deniers today. It's just so infuriating. It's like, come on, man.
Well, I kind of pointed this out a while back on my other podcast when we had this trend of taking down Civil War statues. It's like, you don't have to agree with the statue. You can feel free to put up a plaque next to it, pointing out with an arrow, talking about this guy's an asshole. But if we start taking them down 30 years from now, we already have Holocaust deniers. If we take down all the evidence, are we going to have Civil War deniers at some point? I mean, just because there's a monument doesn't mean it's a celebration. We can't say, well, let's go to Germany and enjoy the celebration of the Auschwitz Museum. No, it's some particular monuments are a reminder of bad things that happened. As we all used to say when we were kids, learn from history or you're bound to repeat it. Well, now it's erase history so we can, pretend it never happened so we don't have to acknowledge horrible things that happened. And that in and of itself is a tragedy, and we got to stop it.
Yeah, it's tricky. I've been to Texas, and you got to think like I grew up in Canada, so it's just a different system up there. And going to some of these places in Texas where there are Civil War monuments that how to say this, talk fondly of the Confederacy, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's surprising to see that. And yet you're raising a great question. Should we take down those monuments, or should we keep them up, but just tell both sides of the story?
I live in Florida. I live in a county called Lee County. We've had people literally cut the head off of the General Lee statue down here. And we've had, the people who were native down here. I'm from Ohio, so, I'm from up north, and it's a weird dichotomy. And, you have the people. You see bumper stickers down here with the flag saying it's all about history, not hate. And it's like, I get that, but growing up from Ohio, I've seen how other people appropriate that flag for different meanings. And so that's one of the things that you have to kind of balance being a historian. It's like, there are both sides of the story. There's people suggested we rename our county. There's people fighting against it. When I worked in radio, the area I live in, we have the Ford Museum, the Edison Museum, and Firestone, because all three of them had vacation homes down here. And we have the Edison Bridge, and then there's a bridge right next to it that someone, we have the Edison Mall, and Edison plays a huge role down here. And someone threw the idea of, well, let's name the other bridge the Ford Bridge. And at the time, I worked on a #1 afternoon show on a 100,000-watt radio tower. And the guys knew my history, and they said, well, what do you think about naming it after Edison? And I said, I don't think we should name a bridge after a guy who put out anti-Semitic newspapers at his dealerships. 4 days later, newspaper reporter talking to the people over at the Holocaust Museum and the Jewish population, and they said the same thing. Hey, we shouldn't, and so they never named that bridge, and so it's tricky because there's two sides of all history, and how you play that, where it's once again using the phrase we used earlier, palatable to both sides. It's a tricky one to play.
It is. I mean, because every army that goes to war has a reason for it.
Mm-hmm.
And to be able to think empathetically about the enemy's position, that is difficult, but probably necessary stuff. I mean, on a popular level, Clint Eastwood, right?
Yep.
He did the movie. It was, he told the same story from two different perspectives in two different movies. It was like, what, Flags of Our Fathers was one?
And Letters from Iwo Jima.
Yeah, Letters from Iwo Jima.
There you go. Yeah. And that's a fascinating, to put yourself in the shoes of the Japanese soldier going, okay, they had reasons for doing what they did. Hard stuff, but necessary to get our heads around.
And that is a nice thing we're seeing in some of the newer movies. Oh, I can't remember what. So it was. What was the movie that came out not too long ago about the sea battle? I completely.
Midway.
That's one of the things that Jeff Henry and I said. The nice thing about Midway is they didn't give the Japanese the boogeyman complex. They showed it from the scenes that they're showing from the Japanese side. They were showing cool collective guys trying to do their job in this conflict, and then when they switched to the Ally side, it was, they didn't really give it the boogeyman conflicts of here's our enemy, they're horrible people. It was a more honest, and I think we're kind of starting to see that more in a lot of these conflict shows and movies. Is they're kind of trying to give at least a more honest, depending on who the villain is. But we're starting to see that a little bit more, I think, in more movies and shows now.
Yeah.
Which is more fair to their ancestors who were watching this stuff too.
Absolutely.
So I think that we always do this little segment near the end of the show called What You're Reading, and it's always more fun when we have authors on here. So I'm going to start with Henry today. Henry, what you reading?
I am about 300 pages into Ian Toll's third volume of his Pacific War trilogy, War in the Western Pacific. So enjoying that very much.
Jeff, what you reading?
The book is called Wind in the Wires. It is a memoir of a British World War I fighter pilot.
That's a change up, but we know you love aviation, but talking about not that long ago, there was a tremendous amount of change of technology between World War I aviation and World War II. It's probably a nice little change of pace as far as the topic goes to go back that far back as far as technology goes compared to what you read about in World War II.
Yeah, well, and I've said it on here before, to truly understand the Second World War, I think we need to understand what happened before it and why some of these decisions were made. And it's interesting you bring up the technology, because this man's memoir, the main theme behind it is how much things changed when he was shot down in 1915, and when he finally makes it back to getting in the cockpit once again in 1918. He said it was like a time warp had happened where everything looked the same, but everybody he knew was dead, and the aircraft had advanced so incredibly that he thought he had been advanced to the future
in just two short years.
In those 3 years. So to think about, it's not just Spads and Newports and triplanes that were circling the skies for the First World War, to see what the British were flying in these kites, these box kites, really, these longhorns and shorthorns are what they were called, advancing to the BE-2s, and then to come back, and then now you've got a Spad 13. We see them as mostly all rudimentary aircraft, I think, from a World War II perspective, but not the case for the guys that were there. So it's interesting if that much technology elapsed in those 3 years, that war, then it really, I think, should give us an appreciation of the interwar years, and then, of course, what we did in the Second World War. So I think it's a little off subject for me, but not that far off subject.
Marcus, we're going to change up a little bit for you, but first off, what you reading, and then what you working on?
So I'll answer the second question first. There, I'm doing a book right now, a biography with a Hollywood actor who I actually can't name yet because of a non-disclosure agreement. But he's a big supporter of the USO.
Oh,
And
okay.
of course, that interests me, and just shining the spotlight on the troops. So I've been reading books surrounding his life story right now, which is a little bit out of my wheelhouse. But the book that I always recommend that I've just started, I just pulled out to go through for the third time is Laura Hillenbrand's Unbroken. She sets the standard for just excellent writing, and she's a terrific person all around. And Louis Zamperini's story, I mean, you just can't go wrong with it. It's just a well told story and a phenomenal heroic story all the way through.
Okay, two weird things. As we were talking about the Death March in your book earlier, as I said, I worked in radio about 6 or 7 years ago, and at the time Unbroken came out, and I got a whole stack of promotion posters. And so when I was talking about that, I'm glancing over to my right where I actually have the Unbroken poster pinned up on my wall here. So to have you bring that book up, and the fact is, I got into reading late in life. I was in my mid to late 20s because I grew up with a learning disability, and reading was a struggle for me. But the second book in my ever-expanding World War II book collection was We Are Who Are Alive and Remain, the book you spoke about. So to have you on the show when your book was the second book in my ever-growing collection, Voices Pacific, I'm staring at right now as well. It's very cool. But I am reading. I finished up the book that I was reading, and I've actually gone over to the European theater. I'm reading 4 Hours of Fury. Have anybody read that?
I have not.
It's the untold story of the World War II's largest airborne invasion and the final push into Nazi Germany. It's about the 17th and the 7th British Airborne, and then the 17th. Yeah, I believe it's 17th, but it's really cool because it talks about actually how the airborne came to be, and how, since they didn't have a history, how their uniform standards came to be, and it goes into, the drop over the Rhine and all the missions that it actually took. I'm only a couple of chapters into it, but it's a really good book, and I'm enjoying it. And there's a lot about glider riders. We've talked about here my interest in the glider riders, and how there's not a whole lot in pop culture per se about, that aspect of the airborne. The guys who, when they first started, they didn't get special uniforms, no special patches, they didn't get any danger pay. They're basically just infantry putting gliders, and as time went by, they, all that changed, and the whole glider rider aspect of it is cool as well. And so I'm into that book, and we're going to see where that takes me, and we'll go on down the line.
Well, Don, now I'm curious because the book you were reading, if I'm not mistaken, was I'm Staying with My Boys. Right?
Yes.
I've been dying to ask you.
Okay.
How did you think it ended? I thought, well, I'll let you answer.
It ended pretty well. I will say it definitely gave more detail about his contribution to that particular campaign, as far as how long he was on the island, and, setting up guys, trying to set up that line of perimeter, going back for help. Whereas when you watch the Pacific, it's like, he landed, made it halfway up the hill, got hit with a mortar, and dead. Whereas when you read the book, you realize, oh no, he landed and was heading out to his objective, setting up guys, or getting overran. He went back to get more guys to fill the line. And so there's definitely more history to, that part of, up to the point where he died. But, I enjoyed the book. It was good. And I definitely learned a lot about John Basler. And I will say it is difficult, and I did get over it. But when I first started reading it, knowing that he died, and knowing that he probably didn't transcribe a whole lot of his thoughts and feelings on, his time in the service, and then how the book is portrayed in the first person, once I got past that, I enjoyed the book. It really shined a lot more on, him as a person, and going from the Army, and his time boxing, and then the USO tours. And I enjoyed how it took him a while, but when he realized the insane amount, when you're doing these USO tours and you're pulling in $14 billion with a B in 1943, and he's like, okay, okay, maybe I'm not so much of a donkey in a circus. I'm actually doing good for the guys back home. I'm actually, for the guys out and on the line, I'm actually helping. We're raising real money here. We're not just, putting a nice shine on the war effort. That was nice to see, and then go into detail about that as well.
Well, I think it proves to show that every now and then historical fiction, when done well,
Yes.
can be a powerful tool. Looking forward to reading your book, Marcus. This is really exciting. We really appreciate, you taking that time. You and, of course, Miss Lee, to give it your all, your A+, because you as an author and Don and myself and Henry as these kind of next generation that have had the torch passed to us to help keep history alive, whether it's through podcasting, reenacting, sharing our passion and what we're reading, and being able to hear your story and being able to appreciate your work. I think it shows we're all on the same page, and we do know that we are a link to keep it going. And as we get older, to be cognizant of the fact that as these guys are going, the younger people are now looking to us. So whatever facet we use to keep it alive, I think we should always be like you, sir, and give it that A+ effort.
Yeah, thanks. So thanks for what you guys are doing as well. I mean, here's a question. Off the top of your head, what is one thing that you would want today's generations to know about World War II?
I'll answer that. That it's not so unlike any war where young people were forged into this sort of, like you said, taking these benevolent people to do very malicious things sometimes because the war was fought for a reason, and to not forget that reason and to not forget those that didn't come home.
The worst thing about having Jeff on the show, he always wraps the show up with these great poignant things that I just want to go out on. I just want to hit the end cue, but then I don't get to say, hey, Marcus, please put out your plugs. And so it's like, he always has these great just final words. You just want to hit the end of the show and just go off in the sunset on these beautifully spoken things. But I got to say, hey, Marcus, what's your plugs? Let's get, where can people find you? And so while we're at it, where can people find you? Where can they track down your new book and keep up with what you got coming down in the future?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. So the book is called The Long March Home, and it's available on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, or ask for it at a bookstore near you, or go to my website, Marcus-Brotherton.com, and it's got some links there. I think for me, with World War II, it creates a tremendous sense of gratefulness for the life I've been given today, for the life that I've created for myself, my family. The fact that other people fought and bled and died for my freedom, and to gain a true sense of that, it makes me want to do something purposeful with my life. I think it makes me complain less as well. I was at a car auction a while ago, and it was winter, and I was standing right outside with a bunch of guys at this auction, kind of stamping my feet to keep warm, and everybody was kind of grumbling and grousing, myself included. And then it takes me back to the guys I've talked to who've been in Bastogne. It's like, if the guys can survive Bastogne, surely I can survive a car auction in the cold.
I think anybody who reads as much as we do and invests as much time as we have on this topic have all had that same thought. There's I'm an IT guy. It's like, if I could hop in a time machine, go back to 42, go to the front lines, they'd be like, look, Mac, I don't know what an active directory domain controller is and what the problem with the DHCP film, but if you want to switch place, get in this foxhole, I'll happily hop in that time machine and go deal with your problems, and you can live through mine. And, it's all perspective. And anytime I'm having a bad day or a rough go at it, I had that same thought. It could be worse. I could be here doing this, or I could have been there in time doing that, or even modern day. I could be overseas right now dealing with what's going on. So definitely. Oh, boy, I don't want to go to the gym today. Well, it could be marching up Curry and jump boots back in 43 in Tacoma, Georgia, or you can go to, 30 minutes at the gym. Which one do you want to do? And so I think for a lot of people into history, we use that as a way to stop bitching about our daily problems, and I think it's a good thing. And as always, if you guys want to get more information on our guests, please head over to WTSPWWII-EP.151. You'll find the page with Marcus and all the links to his upcoming projects and where you can find his book and all that. A real quick update. I think last episode we did the drawing for the first Patreon prize pick with the Warbird coffee, the What's the Scuttlebutt mug, which you won't see because it's green. It's going to blend into my background. Some stickers and the autographed end blocks. Anytime you roll out a new thing like prize giveaways, the interns kind of fail their jobs, and the first person we chose actually their account was not active, so we promptly repicked, and we already know this on Patreon, but we want to give a shout out. The winner of the Warbirds coffee is Alexander Richard Marshall. So, sir, go check your email on Patreon. I sent you a message to verify that your address is correct so we can get that coffee out to you, and we will pick prize winner number 2 at the end of this month. And we want to thank everybody for your continued support. And if you want to help what we do here at the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast, please head over to WTSPWWII-EP.com. That's WWII, WTSPWWII-EP.com. Click on the Patreon link, sign up and subscribe, or just simply head over to YouTube and subscribe and watch some of our content. You can help us there. And for myself, Jeff, Henry, and Marcus, thank you guys so much for hanging out with us, and we will talk to you all next week.
This has been a Digital 410 production.